scribbling down a note. Apologies. I'm at my desk. No, didn't even have time to put up my Dog Nation backdrop today. But if you're on here, you guys know who you're listening to. You know what time it is. Towers Take is brought to you by Marco's Pizza every Thursday at this time, going on throughout the season, 12:30 p.m. Come have lunch with me and Marco's, America's #1 pizza company, where you can always get their great deal on 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 a piece. Thank you, Marco's, for providing that great deal for Dog Nation readers and viewers such as they are. And, man, what an exciting week. I just now got through posting my second Towers Take column of the week on the Georgia-South Carolina game. This one is looking at the history of the Georgia-South Carolina rivalry, particularly in Williams-Brice Stadium. And as you would imagine, the numbers bear out what you would probably think about that series. Be sure to put your comments on Facebook. I'm going to go in here and find them now and answer your questions. That's my primary purpose here today, if I can get it. Let me get that up. But, yeah, you know, in looking at the data on the Georgia-South Carolina game in Columbia, and this is a question that I asked there at Towers Take, and I would love to get some conversation on that here. Does that matter? You know, does it matter what has happened in the past in any rivalry, particularly, you know, Georgia-South Carolina or any of them, when it comes to playing an opponent? And my conclusion, I mean, I'll go ahead and tell you, was yes, it does. It does matter. And there's a lot of factors that are included in that, but which I bear out, you know, in my my column that you can read on Dog Nation now. But for the sake of conversation here, you know, there is a reason that games have been like they have between Georgia and South Carolina when they play early in the year in the SEC opener, which you are this year, in South Carolina. And that is particularly the case when both teams are ranked, which South Carolina is now, just barely. You know, they're ranked 24, and Georgia is ranked number 3 going into this game. But even when South Carolina hasn't been ranked and Georgia's been highly ranked, these games have been wars. They've been crazy. They've taken great drama for Georgia to win. Now, Georgia has won them most of the time, but a lot of times they're coming out of there by the skin of their silver britches, you know, because, and there's several reasons for that, and I touch on this, but, you know, I think the primary one is just that Georgia is such a huge rival for South Carolina. I don't know that Georgia necessarily returns that rivalry, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it. You know, I mean, Georgia has, you know, Florida probably #1 in everybody's book, certainly Brandon Adams' book. You know, Auburn, Tennessee, I think Alabama is developing into quite a rival. Auburn, you know, the oldest rivalry in the Deep South. You know, all those probably come before South Carolina for Georgia, but not for South Carolina. For South Carolina, Georgia is a strong #2 to Clemson, and a couple of players at the SEC preseason media days mentioned that it was the most important, the biggest rival for them. And you could understand that because of everything it means to the SEC East. So what you have here is Georgia, consensus #1 pick in the SEC East, South Carolina, coached by Will Muschamp, consensus #2 pick in the East. So the top 2 teams in the East meeting early in the season at Williams-Brice. You know, I don't know. I've seen 2 trends this week. Again, love to hear what you guys have to say about it. See if I can get your. Here we go. Marvin Campbell, William Moore, Matthew Ertley is here. You know, a lot of people talking about. So I see it going to. So certainly, I know everybody's noticed this. The national trend is to pick South Carolina as the upset special this week, and you can kind of see where people are coming from. on that. And then the other side is the the Georgia people, I think, are very, very confident going into this game. And look, you take Will Muschamp and Kirby Smart out of this. Really, the players, for the most part, they all believe they're going to win. I don't get into that bulletin board material, whatever. I'd be surprised if Debo Samuel or anybody else on their team, T.J. Brunson, didn't think they were going to win. That's always the case. That should be the case, or else you shouldn't be in the game. But the fans in particular, I see a lot of Georgia fans out there saying it's not even going to be close, our speed and everything is better. And it is. I mean, I like every matchup Georgia has in this game, with the exception of South Carolina's wide receiver core versus Georgia's defensive backs. I think that's one that favors South Carolina a little bit. The South Carolina passing attack of Jake Bentley, Debo Samuel, Brad Edwards, a couple other guys are pretty good over there. It's going to be tough for Georgia. But I like Georgia's offense overall better than I do South Carolina's overall against the defense. I'm giving Georgia the edge in special teams. I'm not confident about that because it's just so early. Certainly Jake Camarda looked good punting the ball. Field position in this game traditionally does great. You're welcome, Michael Brown. So thanks for the videos. I got a lot of people that thanked me for the video tour of the West End last week, and I wanted to get that up there quicker. But anyway, so touching on this specifically, so Georgia and South Carolina have played every year since 1992, home and away. When South Carolina came into the league, they've played almost continuously since the 1960s. Really, Georgia always played South Carolina as an out-of-conference opponent when they were an independent and when they were in the ACC from going back to the 60s. Not quite every year, but almost every year. Nowadays, they play them as the Eastern Division, and Georgia has an 8-5 lead in the last 13 games away at Williams-Brice Stadium. And those games, the average margin of those games, this is taking the final score, regardless of who won. The average margin in those games has been 2 points. And the general trend on it is when Georgia's won, it's barely gotten out of there alive. And when South Carolina's won, they've usually won by double digits. They've usually handled Georgia pretty good. Perfect example was 2012. Georgia comes in there ranked number 5. Of course, South Carolina was ranked that year too at 6, and Georgia gets curb stomped 35-7, and that's a team that came 5 yards from winning the national championship and beating Alabama for the SEC championship. So they always play them tough. When most of the time Georgia has come in as the ranked team, and South Carolina has been unranked. Same thing. 2002 when South Carolina, when David Pollock executed the great snatch and grab of, who was it, Andrea Pinkins, I think, in the end zone for a touchdown, 13-7 win that year. The very next time Georgia went back to South Carolina and Williams-Brice Stadium, 2004, one of Mark Rich's best teams didn't actually win the SEC or play for the SEC championship, but they were trailing 16-0. That team was ranked number 4 like this one, and South Carolina was unranked, and they had to come from behind in the second and third quarters and did, and won 20-16. So it's going to be a tough game. I mean, I expect the same thing here, and I do think it transcends years, particularly when you're playing early in the year. I get into this in my column, but I have a bunch of family that live in South Carolina. Many of them are South Carolina graduates. All of them are South Carolina fans. They live in Lexington and Blythewood and Columbia, and it's a huge game for them. And there's that, and then the other side of it. I mean, I think South Carolina does a great job at Williams-Brice Stadium. Period. I mean, I think it's one of the best. It's definitely in the top third of SEC road venues, in my opinion, in terms of the atmosphere they create between 2001 Space Odyssey entrance they run on the field in, and then the sandstorm thing that they do, where they're whipping the towels up. They're going to do that, and they're going to be jacked up, and it's going to be 110 degrees on Saturday. So the key for Georgia and, Kirby Smart, of course, is kind of weathering that storm. Weathering the weather and weathering that storm, and kind of returning, their best serve and hitting back a winner here and there. And I certainly believe Georgia has the personnel to do that, particularly on the offensive side. I mean, there's not a whole lot that you can take out of either one of these two teams from their opening game. South Carolina defeating Coastal Carolina 49-15. Georgia defeating Austin Peay 45-0. But, you know, and it's certainly in the case of Georgia, you know, I just saw some incredible offensive speed and weaponry. And while I am giving South Carolina the nod on their passing attack versus Georgia's secondary, and a lot of that has to do with, you know, Tyson Campbell, a true freshman, starting out there, back there, and 4 or 5 new players playing in the back end for Georgia. And the same goes for South Carolina. They have a freshman cornerback that's going to start as well, and that kid's not a 5-star like Tyson Campbell was. Not that the recruiting rankings are all that, but yeah, Wendell Sloan says here, I wonder what the South Carolina defensive coordinator is thinking about. And that's Lance Thompson, a veteran of the SEC, and actually somebody that Kirby knows well. In fact, Kirby knows a lot of this staff very, very well, between Brian McClendon, the new offensive coordinator, and you know, a number of and Will Muschamp, of course. But Derek Tillman wants to know, hey, Chip, are they expecting Ledbetter to play? They are. Just the fact he was on the practice field, you know, with his ankle in a boot wrapped up, but he was going through the motions. I think he'll be on the bus, as Kirby likes to say this year. You know, they're back in the studio. They're showing you some good shots of Georgia's wide receiver core, including Demetrius Robertson. I mean, I agree 100% with Kirby Smart. I think Deebo Samuel is probably the top playmaker in the Southeastern Conference, and that's including wide receiver and as a kick returner. But, you know, Georgia's got some, too. In fact, Georgia has a lot of them. Now, it's not just Deebo Samuel. Brad Edwards is a really good player. I'm trying to remember the sophomore's name. They got a little fast sophomore. Some of you recruiting guys might remember Randrakis Davis, you know, who was a Georgia commitment at one time. He's there. So all of that is going to come into play. But I like Georgia's offensive line against South Carolina's defense front. Now, look, they have South Carolina has 2 exceptional defensive players in T.J. Brunson and the defensive end guy. But, you know, the rest of them, the rest of the defense is kind of in progress, I think, right now, and certainly not as deep as Georgia. So being hot like it is, you know, if Georgia can run enough players in and out of there and stay relatively healthy and fresh, I think they'll edge this thing out. But I don't know. So the line is 10. It's been creeping down. Maybe it's gotten to single digits. I don't know. I tend to be conservative, and I do get a little caught up in what all I've seen over the years. But I don't think I would take the over on that. I do think both teams are going to score, and this may be more along the lines of the 2014 game. It's 38-35. Most of the games over here have been low scoring. Funny, you know, the weird things over at Sanford Stadium, most of them have been high scoring affairs. Most of them aren't part of it. I'm looking over here reading your. Give me some questions now. We got a lot of comments here. Tony Edwards wants to know, will our tight ends be the X factor? Boy, it's so funny, the obsession with tight ends in Georgia. Georgia does have great tight ends, and I do think they will be a factor. And I do think Georgia's going to throw to them. But I don't think tight ends are going to be a primary target ever under Kirby Smart. I think he's made that clear. I think their blocker's number one, and you're going to run some plays for them every now and then, preferably after they've forgotten about them as targets, because you have so many other targets. And while Isaac Nada and Charlie Warner are great targets in the passing game, they're not home run threats like we saw from Mecole Hardman and Demetrius Robertson. Terry Godwin's supposed to be coming back from this game. He doesn't tend to be along of it. Riley Ridley, Akil Crumpton, James Cook, when he finally gets in the game in the second half. I mean, Georgia has some real home run weapons, and that's why you don't see the tight ends. Although tight ends are great for first downs, tight ends are great every once in a while. You'll forget about them, but you hope the defensive backs forget about them, and you'll get them wide open down the hash marks on that seam route. But that is not something that you just do time and time again. That guy right there, Nicole Hardman, who they are showing pictures of now out of the studio in Atlanta, I think I picked him. I might have picked Akil Crumpton, but in the Cover 4 series that we're doing with Justin Tell, it's either Akil Crumpton or Nicole Hardman, one of the two I picked as being one of the big play players, one of the under the radar kind of impact players for Georgia. I agree that, like Kirby said, I think Georgia has to reestablish its ability to run between the tackles. That's generally going to be harder here than it is than it was against Austin Peay, and you wasn't great there. But I still think Georgia's going to have to throw the ball a lot. Ken Blankenship, Rodrigo Blankenship's brother, talking to us from Arizona. Here's his question: is there anything in college football stadiums more obnoxious than the rooster scream? Yes, there is something more obnoxious, and that would be Rocky Top, played by Tennessee incessantly. But it's right up there with everything too. Yeah, I hate that little scream sound that they have. Are you going to be able to make it, Ken? Ken Blankenship, Rodrigo's older brother, makes a lot of games, but he has to come a long way, and he has to pick and choose the ones he comes from. Got some nice comments earlier this week, speaking of Hot Rod, from Kirby Smart, and I'll write this up before we get to the game Saturday, but just talking about how far he's come from basically when Kirby was saying everything he needed to see out of Rodrigo Blankenship. He needed more consistency. He needed more range on his field goals. He needed to see better kickoffs. And then I was pointing out he was 1 for 1 on his field goals this past Saturday, 8 for 8 on touchbacks, and of course, made a 51-yarder and 55-yarder in the college football playoff last year. So yeah, he's come a long way. How will Georgia handle the noise? Being asked here. Ben Cleveland talked about yesterday, like Georgia always does. Georgia goes indoors, cranks up the sound as high as they can, playing all those South Carolina songs, 2001 Space Odyssey, Sandstorm. There's a shot of Hot Rod. He always closes one eye when he's aiming for those goalposts, and he looks really, really good to me this year, just solid and a strong physical presence now. He's every bit of 6'2", and I bet you he's up to 200 pounds by now. He works out with the team and does a good job. There's Boom, Will Muschamp. He's got a good squad. I think Will has shown everywhere he's been that he can put together a good team, put together a good defense, and he's hoping now with Brian McClendon as his offensive coordinator that he'll finally get an offense to go with all that. That's been his difficulty as a head coach, is getting an offense going. He's grabbing the trend and following the trend in college football and trying to go up tempo. That's going to be different than what we've seen from South Carolina the last 2 years. As you recall, Georgia won the last 2 games by 2 touchdowns, and in both of those cases, 2016 in Columbia, in 2017 in Athens, it was clear that Muschamp was trying to slow it down and keep the game close, and he did a pretty good job of that. That's the danger in South Carolina, trying to go fast, and it's very important that you make some first downs, you get some big plays, or that hurry up doesn't do you any good. It means your offense is hurrying up and getting off the field, and on a hot day like that can really, really get tiring. So that's going to be interesting to see. Jacob McMillan says he hopes to see a kickoff return on the first play for Georgia to just go ahead and shut the Sandstorm up right there. That'd be a good ploy. I think it's all kidding aside, I think it's very, very important that Georgia take the crowd out of it as early as you can, because the longer they hang around, the longer it stays close, the tougher it's going to get. The more the belief system starts to get in there, momentum starts to make a difference, and that's right. Tony Edwards says, "Who's Debo? Who's Debo Samuel?" I think everybody here is Red Dog Nation definitely knows who they are. Where do we dominate most on the defensive side? Somebody asked me there. I actually like Georgia's front now. South Carolina's got a pretty decent offensive line, but I kind of like Georgia on the edges. I think they're going to be able to disrupt Jake Bentley a little bit and get some pressure on the passer. I know everybody wants to see that. And look, I expect Natrez Patrick to be a big part of this game. Certainly Monty Rice and Juwan Taylor have earned their stripes as starters in the inside linebacker. But Natrez Patrick has got a lot of experience, played a lot of these games. You're still going to have to get in there and stuff that run because South Carolina showed that they've got some backs. They had over 200 yards rushing against Coastal Carolina, and you got to stop that first and foremost. A lot of people asking about the running back rotation here. Teresa Hilliard-Harrion, I just called his name there, says Brian Harrion is definitely overlooked. Not sure why, but he will continue to work. That's right, Miss Harrion. Brian started this past game, and he's a good shot of starting this one as well. And Brian, very, very much a big part of Georgia's rotation and will continue to be, especially with James Cook out for the first half of this game. So I think you'll see 35, 7, and 13. Elijah Holyfield get the ball a lot against South Carolina. But I do believe the best way that T.J. Brunson, South Carolina's middle linebacker, is as good a linebacker as you're going to see in the league this year, especially for the role he plays on this defense. He's an NFL caliber inside linebacker. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough sledding inside there. I think the best way for Georgia to matriculate down the field, as I like to say, it's going to be throwing the football. I'm sorry. We'll see. Kirby always wants to run first, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it's just great. It's always best to advance the ball like that. A lot of people commenting on the squirrel in the background. Actually, there's normally a golf picture that hangs down there. Those of you who've seen me do this without the backdrop recognize that picture. I decided to take it down, and I had the blind squirrel on the refrigerator, and so I decided to grab that, stick that back there, and paying homage to Brandon Adams, who loves to do the blind squirrel thing. And hey, I think it's pertinent. That's the charge of Dan Mullen and many in the league saying everybody can find an acorn every once in a while, even a blind squirrel, and Georgia's got to prove that last year wasn't a fluke, and this is where it happens. Now, I think if Georgia can come through here and handle this game, I think they start to get a little bit on the downhill. I mean, Missouri's still going to be good, going to be tough, but I think the South Carolina game is going to be the toughest that they face until they get to LSU on October 13th. So Georgia has a lot on the line in this game. I think they'll be cool. A lot of people talk about Georgia's difficulties in the past were because of Mark Richt was the coach. And, some of that may be true. But, Kirby, he's said it all week. He realizes what a tough place this is to play, and very, very important that you get in there and take that crowd out of it as quick as possible. Here's a good question. I'm surprised it took this long. Maybe somebody's asked it before. Chad Conkle wants to know, will Justin Fields play? I think that's the appropriate question when it comes to the quarterback rotation. A lot of people are just saying automatically, when do you think Justin Fields will play, or how much do you think he'll play? I do think Kirby is being honest where he says, like he did this week, that the game will dictate how they handle the quarterbacks, and that, Jake Fromm's going to start it, and then they'll see, and I think that'll be the case. If the game goes like I expect it to, then I would imagine we might not see Justin Fields unless Georgia gets it in hand really, really late. Now, that said, I wouldn't be surprised if they put him in for a series in each half, possibly even in the first quarter, just to see. And look, I remember, talking about all those games in the early 2000s that were so difficult. I can't remember if it was 2004 or what year. No, I think it was 2004 that Georgia had to turn to DJ Shockley. If I'm not mistaken, I think David Green might have given up was having a tough day passing the ball, and they had to go with DJ Shockley a good bit in that game. Georgia rallied for a 20-16 win in 2004, and that was a really, really good team against an unranked South Carolina team. So how much will Justin Fields play? I don't think he'll play a lot, but I do think he'll play. So I would say it would be spot duty, and unless, of course, that Jake Fromm is really, really struggling. Let's see. Yeah, Miss Harriet's still going at it here. Not sure what games you're watching, but it can't be number 35 you're talking about with negative yards. Yeah, he did not have any negative yards, if I'm not mistaken, in the last game. Let's see exactly what did he have. Brian Harriet's a good player. There's no question about that. Let's see, here it is right here. Harriet, Georgia leading rusher, of course, Demetrius Robertson with 72 yards. Georgia rushing, Brian Harriet, just one carry for 2 yards. I thought he carried the ball more than that. He did catch some, I do believe. Yeah, 3 catches for 20 yards, along with 13. But Mama's right, or sister, I'm not sure. I apologize. He did not have a negative play. So we're going to get ready to wrap up here pretty quickly. Let's get some more questions here before I sign off. Is Godwin cleared to play? Ken Blankenship wants to know. We did not hear definitively. All indications are that Godwin's going to make the trip. The big question is Jonathan Ledbetter, who has sprained his ankle in practice Tuesday, was out there yesterday. I imagine he'll go. That receiver situation will be real interesting to watch and see who shows up on the bus on Saturday, because Georgia has a lot of different receivers to choose from, some really good ones, but they can only take so many. I would imagine Georgia will travel 8, 9, 10 receivers because so many of them contribute on special teams. But I do expect Godwin to be one of those. Eric Henry Hall wants to know, who do you think gets a sack or two for UGA? Anyone you feel will be a beast on the D-line? The way Georgia's set up now, and with South Carolina running so much of the spread, I think Georgia will definitely get to the quarterback, but I don't necessarily think it'll be defensive end or outside linebacker. Generally, those come on blitzes between defensive backs and or linebackers. So let's just go ahead and say, Monty Rice gets in there and gets him one, and maybe whoever's playing star, maybe D'Angelo Gibbs. I think we're going to see a good bit of Gibbs because you're going to have to see the DB in the star role this week, and he is a cornerback level defensive back. So I think we'll see him. DeAndre Walker obviously is Georgia's best pass rusher, but you got to be careful. And Jake Bentley's pretty mobile, and you can't just line up and come after him bells like you got to approach it like you do Baker Mayfield. You got to be very careful. I think you'll see Georgia drop a lot of guys in coverage and kind of try to keep them underneath them, particularly number 1 Deebo Samuel. Just a couple of minutes left here. Let's see if we've got some more questions. Who do you think will get the win on Saturday? Michael Mathis, I'm on the record saying Georgia's going to win them all this season, so I expect Georgia to win. If the line stays at 10, I'll say Georgia by 9. I've just seen too many of these to think that they'll go over there and blow them out. I hope they do. It's easier on me and Mike Griffith and Justin Tell and those of us writing in the press box. Tony Edwards wants a final prediction. I haven't picked a score yet. I do think both teams are going to score a good bit. I would say something along the lines of maybe 31-23. I don't know how they'll get to that number, but that's what I'm going with, 31-23. A lot of people here saying a lot of positive things. Hey, tell me what you want. Tell me what you want to read. Again, I need to tell all you guys to please patronize Marco's Pizza. You will not regret it. It's not only is it great pizza, it's affordable. You can get 2 medium 2-topping pizzas for just $6.99 each, and Marco's Pizza. You'll see them sponsor a lot of stuff on Dog Nation, and they sponsor Tyler's Take, so I am particularly infatuated with them. But I'm not kidding, it really is good pizza, and so you need to do that for sure. Y'all give me your scores. Seen a lot of them. Paul Cox says 38-13. Billy Cloud says 31-24. Mike Daring says 38-13. Georgia. Jacob McMillan 38-21. Yeah, I've not seen any Gamecock fans in here. Blake Stikelether says 35-14. Mickey Fuquay 38-13. 35-0, James Martin. So clearly, the Dog Nation, as it were, much more confident than the old beat writer is. 45-17 says Richard Smith. 35-21, Rick Wallace. 38-21, Steve Edwards. 32-28. That's interesting alert. Thank you, Tony Edwards. He says that he loves Dog Nation, and we love you, the Dog Nation. For everybody back in Atlanta, Connor Riley, Michael Carvel, thanks for the great pictures and sound. I hope you found this enjoyable. You can see it every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Right here on the Dog Nation's Facebook page. Thanks again, Marco's Pizza, and I am out of here. See you on Dog Nation.